Hi and welcome back. Today we are going to add a fail condition in form of a player's death and learn a few useful tips on the way. Let's get going. Okay, so we need to make the player die today, and we are going to implement it through spikes that player has to avoid. Later we will add enemies also, but for now spikes are a good obstacle. So first things first, we need to create a spike. And how we can do it? Yeah, that's correct. By right-clicking the layout and inserting a new object. Here are two ways to do it. First one is to choose a tiled background, which would make adding new spikes next to each other easier by scaling the object. It is more efficient to computer if you have hundreds and hundreds of spikes in your layout, but you can't really modify the spikes colliders. That is the reason why I prefer doing them as sprites. Adding them is a bit more work, but it gives us opportunity to make them feel better when we are playing the game with more tight colliders. So let's choose a sprite for now and name it as SPR_spike. And finally, let's draw our spike. Here I would recommend on using the size of 32 by 32. Before we close our editor, we can modify the colliders that I talked about earlier. When we press the triangle shaped icon in the left side column, Construct will show us the collider shape of the object in the blue color. Collider basically means that if anything hits the blue area, Construct will see it as something hitting the spike. Here you can see that the collider shape is rectangle and the object shape is triangle, so it is possible to player hit the collider even though it looks like it didn't touch the spike at all. If we change the collider shape to match the shape of the spike, then we can make our gameplay more responsive, as a player hits the spikes only when it also looks like it inside the game. Finally, we can close the editor. Now, to make placing the spikes on the level easier, we can use the construct's snap to grid feature. By left-clicking on the layout, we can get the layout's properties in the properties window. There you can find two options called show grid and snap to grid. With those selected, if we try to move the object in the scene, they will snap to the grid every time. If our spikes or other objects are different size than the grid, you can change the grid side in the properties window. Well, there's a small problem with the spikes as they don't really snap to the grid the way I would like. And the reason for that is that the sprites will snap to the grid's intersects by their origin point. Normally, object's origin point is in the middle of the object if not changed, but gladly we can change it by going back to the spikes sprite editor and selecting the tool above the collider tool. It will show a small marker at the middle of the sprite. Now we can move it by clicking somewhere else inside the sprite, and I will move it to the bottom middle. Now our spikes will snap to the grid so that they can be placed on top of the ground. Remember, if you want to change the player's origin point, then you need to do it for every single frame separately. You can duplicate the spikes by pressing the control button and tracking the object. Now, if we run our game, we can see that nothing happens yet if we touch the spikes, but the spikes are drawn on top of the player. This is called Z order, where the spikes are on top of the player. Z meaning the Z coordinate that would exist if we had a 3D game. But basically it means that the objects that are at the bottom of the Z order are drawn first, and the ones on the top will be drawn last on the screen. So it will look like the ones that are on top will look as they are in front of the other objects. To change this, we need to right click our player and choose Z order. After that, we want to send it on top of the layer, so it's drawn last on the screen. Okay, now we have the spikes on the screen and the player drawn on top of them. Next, we need to make some logic so the player dies when it hits the spikes. So let's jump on the event sheet and make some events. So for our condition, we need to check if our player hits the spikes. So the objects we choose is player, and for the condition itself, it is on collision with another object. Then we need to choose what object we want to check. Here, of course, we choose the spike object. Next, what will happen when we hit the spike? Well, we want that the player dies, and after that, let's restart the current level. Player's death can be made in two different ways. You can make a death animation for it, or you can just destroy the player. I'm going to implement it by destroying the player, but if you want, feel free to make the animation. You'll just make it the same way as the other animations in the last episode. But now our first action is going to be one where we disable the controls from the player. If you destroy the player on death, then you don't really need this. But with animation root, this is a good thing to have, as you can't move the player while you're dying. So we choose player, find something called set enabled in the platformer section. Then we choose the disabled state and press done. Next, we add a second action to the same event to destroy the player object. So far, there's only been one action per event, but there can be multiple in the same event. So we just press the add action and again choose our player as we want to destroy it. Then we choose action called destroy. Now we still have to add few actions to reload the scene. First, I want to wait around a second so that the level doesn't restart right at the same frame the player dies. So we make a new action, and this time we choose the system. It will contain a lot of useful actions that doesn't do anything to any particular object. So at the bottom we should find one called wait, and in the new window we can specify how many seconds we want to wait. Well, I'll keep it as a 1 for now. And finally, for the last action, we need to restart the level, and that can also be found under the system. It's called restart the layout. Now we should have a working death condition in our game, and let's test it out right away. It looks like we can die, and the level also restarts. Great. Well, that's all for today, and on the next episode we will add an enemy for our game.